You think that when we talk about the fall of the Medellin cartel, it all ended on a rooftop with a barefoot man in blue socks and a single shot to the ear. You picture Pablo Escobar dying among the roof tiles, and you assume the story closed right there. But around the boss there was another structure, one more lethal, more anonymous, colder. The personal army of gunmen that held up the empire for 15 years. This is the story of how the most lethal gunman of the Medellin cartel died, and what you're about to discover changes the entire reading of that war. Because one of them didn't fall in a shootout, nor in a prison, nor in a surrender. One was accused 30 years later of having handed over Escobar himself in exchange for being allowed to keep breathing. His story is the last one in this video, and it's the one that explains why no one from the boss's inner circle survived. Jhon Jairo Arias Tascón, alias Pinina. Before Popeye, before Tyson, before any name the TV series made famous, there was him. Pinina was born in April 1961 in the La Vena neighborhood of Medellin, the son of a family with few financial resources, and by the age of 12 he was already robbing on the streets of the city center. By 14 he was a recognized gang member in his district. By 15 he was pulling the trigger on command. They called him Pinina because of his physical resemblance to a character played by Andrea del Boca in a 1970s Argentine soap opera called Papá Corazón, and the childish nickname stuck with him for the rest of his criminal life. That alone says something about how the Medellin of that era worked, where a nickname from television could override any real name with such ease. Pablo Escobar recruited him very young and turned him into his operational shadow. Pinina came to be considered the fifth most important man within the cartel's hierarchy and the absolute military chief of its apparatus of urban gunmen. Between 1984 and 1990, practically every act of urban terror that shook Colombia passed through his hands. The killing of Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla in April 1984. The attack on the DAS building in December 1989, which left more than 60 fatal victims and nearly tore an entire building from its corner in downtown Bogotá. The relentless hunting of officers in Medellin, where the cartel paid around 2 million pesos for every police agent eliminated. Pinina didn't pull every trigger, but he signed absolutely every operational order. His prestige within the organization was such that Victoria Henao, the boss's widow, wrote years later in her autobiographical book that Pablo valued him like few men in his life. She described him as one of the most loyal he ever had in his service, always willing to accompany him at any hour of the day. Pinina was the first one they called when a problem had to be cleaned up, and the last one ever asked for detailed explanations. He lived in El Poblado, the affluent neighborhood in the south of Medellin, in a third-floor apartment with his young wife and a newborn baby girl, 6 months old. A life of bourgeois facade built on top of homicide figures impossible to even count by approximation. The boss's countdown began running on the exact day this man stopped looking over his shoulder. On June 14, 1990, an elite unit of the National Police raided his apartment in the El Poblado neighborhood in the early afternoon. Pinina was taking a nap with his wife and his small daughter beside him. He didn't surrender when he heard them coming in. He jumped from the third-floor window, trying to escape through the building's inner courtyard, broke his right ankle in the fall, fractured his arm, and split his head open against the basement pavement. Even so, he crawled all the way to the building's parking lot looking for his car to flee. There, another cordon of officers covering the entire outer perimeter was waiting for him. He crawled back up to the first floor of the building, now without strength, leaving a visible trail of blood on every step. When the agents ordered him to stop, he drew his pistol with his good hand, emptied the entire magazine, and the police responded by filling him with lead in a matter of seconds. He had just turned 29. Without Pinina, Escobar was never the same boss again, as if a vital organ had been ripped out of him. If Pinina fell like a boxer refusing to touch the canvas, the next military chief chose a different way to die. Just as violent, but far more cinematic in its final details. Mario Alberto Castaño Molina, alias El Chopo. Before being feared as the king of the bandits, Mario Castaño was a waiter at a hotel in downtown Medellin. He served coffee to regular guests. He collected small tips. He carried heavy trays up narrow staircases. Back then, they nicknamed him El Tartamudo, the stutterer, for his hesitant way of speaking, a nickname that ended up costing two men from the neighborhood their lives because he eliminated them in cold blood for having said it to his face in front of witnesses. Pablo Escobar crossed paths with him at that hotel in the late 1970s, saw in his eyes something he immediately recognized as his own, and took him from the dining room to the armed wing of the cartel. He changed his nickname. He named him Chopo, which in the districts means rifle. He handed him an entire organization to run on permanent fear. After Pinina's death in June 1990 and shortly after Tyson fell 2 years later, El Chopo became the cartel's last military chief. He inherited a wounded structure hollowed out by the operations of the search block and turned it into a suicidal machine with no way back. Between August 1992 and March 1993, he ordered and coordinated the cartel's last great terrorist offensive against the Colombian state, leaving around 200 fatal victims among civilians and officers in different cities across the country. Car bombs in Bogotá, car bombs in Medellin, car bombs in Barranca Bermeja. Targeted killings of police carried out wholesale on every corner of Antioquia. An offensive designed to bring the government to its knees before the government brought the boss definitively to his knees in his hideout. Inside the cartel, he was respected because he took people out on suspicion alone, without waiting for proof and without asking anyone's permission. He was brutal, sadistic, ruthless, and lacked any identifiable moral limit. He was also a heavy user of illegal substances and maintained a permanently bitter mood that frightened even his own direct subordinates. Within the cartel, he proclaimed himself the Pablo Escobar of the street, and Escobar himself granted him an informal title that no other gunman ever received in the entire history of the organization: the King of the Bandits. For his head, the Colombian government came to offer 100 million Colombian pesos of the time, a figure that back then was equivalent to roughly $250,000 US. His death would arrive through a phone book left behind on a table. On July 22, 1992, after Escobar's escape from the prison mansion of La Catedral, the authorities seized a personal notebook belonging to the boss with active phone lines noted by hand. 3 of those lines were placed under permanent electronic surveillance by the search block for entire months. One of them led directly to the apartment where El Chopo slept on the 20th floor of the Bancoquia building in Medellin. On March 19, 1993, 4 elite agents managed to force the apartment door with such professional stealth that he didn't notice until they were already inside the room. He came out shooting with a 9mm pistol from the bed, half-dressed, wearing only blue jeans and black shoes. He emptied the entire magazine against the walls. Not a single bullet reached the police covering the angles. 48 projectiles entered his body in a matter of seconds. The autopsy left an official signed record: 48 bullet holes counted one by one on the body of Mario Castaño Molina. He was 40 years old. With him collapsed the last serious military apparatus of the cartel, and the definitive countdown for Escobar himself began. So far, we've seen the cartel's military chiefs falling under gunfire in their own residential hideouts. The next name is different. He died by the same rules he himself had written. France's Dandeny Muñoz Mosquera, alias Tyson. He was born in 1960 into an enormous family. He was one of 15 legitimate siblings. His father was an ex-policeman turned active evangelical pastor, and his mother preached every Sunday at the Bella Vista prison in Medellin, a house where they prayed twice a day with an open Bible on the dining table, and where even so at least 3 professional gunmen emerged. Francis was a petty thief until the cartel absorbed him in the late 1970s. They called him Tyson because of his physical resemblance to the American boxer Mike Tyson, and because he hit like him. The difference was that his blows took lives on the first try. He became Panina's right hand within the military apparatus and rose quickly through the cartel's organizational chart. When Panina fell in June 1990, Tyson took on a central role alongside El Chopo and the Prisco brothers in coordinating the cartel's terrorist wing. The Colombian authorities attributed between 500 and 700 killings to him, a figure practically impossible to process for a single person in less than a decade of criminal activity. Car bombs against the Cali cartel, attacks against Pacho Herrera and Jose Santa Cruz Londoño, the systematic hunting of police officers in Medellin, with that fixed reward of 2 million pesos per badge burned. Tyson signed, paid, and sometimes pulled the trigger personally. His younger brother, Dandeny, alias La Quica, worked under his direct shadow and over time became another of the cartel's most feared gunmen. Yet another brother, Emilio Alberto Muñoz Mosquera, also ended up eliminated in Bogotá years later in May 2021 in a killing the Colombian press covered with the phrase, "Hitman wearing a killer clown face mask took out a 63-year-old grandfather." 3 sons from the same Christian household, 3 parallel criminal trajectories, 3 premature endings. The Muñoz Mosquera family sums up, better than any official statistic, what the cartel did to the poor neighborhoods of Medellin for 15 straight years. A silent hemorrhage that entered humble homes and carried off entire generations without asking anyone's permission. Tyson's end came on October 28, 1992. A special commando of the police elite corps sent expressly from Bogotá after an anonymous call to the national government's official tip line surrounded the house where he was hiding in the Malibu neighborhood of Medellin. 2 charges of dynamite blew open the building's main entrance from the outside. Tyson, who was sleeping inside, tried to flee by running and firing toward the street. He never reached the street. He was brought down in the operation that same day, just a few meters from the rear exit. He had turned 32 years old. His body was collected that very morning by one of his sisters, accompanied by an official from the sectional prosecutor's office, and they buried him in the afternoon in the family mausoleum at the San Pedro Cemetery in Medellin. A funeral speed that says more than any prayer recited. Whoever lives by dynamite almost always dies by dynamite. Of the 3 Muñoz Mosquera brothers who served the cartel directly, only La Quica is still breathing, locked in a U.S. federal prison serving 10 consecutive life sentences after his capture by the DEA in Queens, New York in September 1991. He has spent more than 15 years in total isolation, with no normal contact with other inmates, and his lawyers are trying to appeal the conviction by alleging false testimony in the original 1994 trial. But that is not the case that closes this video. First, we have to understand those who made pacts, survived, and turned into something completely different from what they once were. Luis Carlos Aguilar Gallego, alias El Mugre. He was born on October 2, 1950 in La Estrella, a small municipality in the south of the Aburrá Valley that during the 1980s exported gunmen to the cartel the way other regions export coffee. El Mugre came to be one of the 5 lieutenants closest to Escobar, and as Popeye himself described him years later, in an interview published by El Tiempo, the most lethal of all without any possible argument. The line was said by the most media-famous hitman in Colombia, so it carries its own specific weight. A total abstainer, religious by family background, the son of a father gunned down in his youth and of a brother who disappeared in the urban violence of the 1970s. A profile the cartel found fit like a glove of its exact size. His role within the organization was twofold and very specific from the beginning. On one hand, he paid the gunmen who worked for the cartel directly. On Fridays, he would appear punctually on a previously agreed corner with a black garbage bag full of cash and hand out wages one by one, salary by salary, to the labor force that worked for Escobar in the northeastern districts. On the other hand, he took part in the organization's most delicate operations. The killing of the nation's Attorney General, Carlos Mauro Hoyos, in January 1988, bears his operational signature. The attack on the Avianca plane in November 1989, in which 110 people died, also points to him as one of the direct logistical figures behind the shipment. The bomb against the DAS building, the same. 3 attacks that changed Colombian institutional history have his fingerprints around them. El Mugre turned himself into the justice system on October 16, 1992, during the phase of negotiated surrenders by the cartel after Escobar's escape from La Catedral. He was held in the Itagüí prison alongside 7 other gunmen trusted by the boss. He served a sentence for trafficking of illegal substances, conspiracy to commit crimes, and illicit enrichment, the offenses the Colombian justice system managed to prove against him judicially. He walked free in 2001 after 9 effective years of prison counted. And there, instead of returning to the criminal business or falling eliminated in a vendetta like nearly all his colleagues of that generation, he did something no one in Medellin expected or dared to predict. He vanished completely from public view. His trail was lost for years until, in June 2017, during a friendly warm-up match between the Colombian and Spanish national soccer teams in the Murcia region, several Colombian businessmen staying at the La Finca Golf Resort complex told a reporter from El Tiempo, sent to the event, that Luis Carlos Aguilar was living in that part of the Spanish Mediterranean, that he no longer collected for organized crime, that he no longer organized killings, that he had become an active pastor of an evangelical church in some municipality of the Murcia region. Colombian intelligence confirmed the account. He alternated residence between Spain and Argentina, had returned at least twice to La Estrella, his hometown in Antioquia, and preached Sunday after Sunday before faithful, who probably knew nothing whatsoever about his past. Open judicial proceedings still weigh on him in Colombia for the DAS bomb and the attack on Avianca Flight 203. The prosecutor's office is still searching for him to take a formal statement in a free deposition. The man who paid the payroll of the cartel's hired gunman now hands out verses in peninsular Spanish before a congregation that would never imagine what garbage bag this very gentleman was carrying every Friday of 1989. Sometimes the most effective escape is not geographical, but spiritual. If El Mugre chose to preach far away, the next lieutenant attempted something similar to European exile. But surviving the past he dragged behind him proved much more complicated for him. Carlos Mario Alzate Urquijo, alias El Arete. He was born on September 26, 1961, and entered the cartel as little more than a teenager. He was the son-in-law of Roberto Escobar, alias El Osito, the boss's older brother, which opened the doors to the most intimate circle of the Escobar Gaviria family. A position not earned through accumulated criminal merits, but through family blood and a strategic marriage. They nicknamed him El Arete, the earring, for an aesthetic peculiarity he wore dangling from his ear. And under that alias he ran his own substructure of gunmen in the Buenos Aires neighborhood of Medellin. Historians of Colombian organized crime place him among the most ruthless men of the cartel, with an estimated record of more than 300 killings on top of him. His technical specialty was dynamite. He was one of the main logistical figures responsible for the installation and activation of car bombs during the cartel's final terrorist offensive. The attack against the headquarters of the newspaper El Espectador, which occurred on September 2, 1989 in Bogota, bears his direct signature according to his own signed judicial confession. The car bomb against the police station in the El Poblado neighborhood in June 1990, in which an officer and 2 civilians who happened to be passing by lost their lives, the same. And in a confession he made before the Office of the Attorney General in February 1993, he incriminated himself in the attack on Avianca Flight 203, stating in full that the true objective of the attack was to eliminate the then presidential candidate Cesar Gaviria, who the Medellin cartel had confidential information would be traveling on that Bogota-Cali flight. Gaviria did not travel. 110 people did. El Arete turned himself into the Colombian authorities on February 17, 1993, in the midst of the cartel's operational collapse. He acknowledged before the judge his participation in 40 killings ordered directly by Escobar, in addition to his logistical role in the major national attacks of the period. He served his sentence in the Itagüí prison and later in La Picota in Bogota. He walked free on November 27, 2001, after practically 9 effective years of prison served. His freedom lasted less than he expected as he stepped onto the street that morning. Barely leaving the detention facility, two gunmen ambushed him at the very exit of the compound and fired 2 shots at him almost point blank. He miraculously survived the attack. But it was immediately clear that the cartel's old accounts were not settled with a judicial sentence signed by a judge with an official seal. The cartel's accounts were settled with an emptied magazine. The Colombian state then decided to offer him official protection, granted him a new identity with valid legal papers, and sent him into European exile. The chosen destination was Barcelona, Spain. He has lived there for more than 2 decades under a false name in a city whose language he probably never spoke before landing at El Prat airport. The Colombian prosecutor's office is still trying to establish his exact address so that he answers judicially for his role in the bombing of the Avianca plane. The man who planted the explosive charges on the streets of Medellin now goes unnoticed on those of the Barcelona ice sample. Whoever rules from the shadows lasts longer, until one day he begins to last by force. Before reaching the last name on the list, there's a story that many believe they know and very few truly know in full. That of the most media-famous gunman of all time, Jhon Jairo Velásquez alias Popeye. He was born on April 15, 1962 in Yarumal, Antioquia. He came to the cartel introduced personally by Panina, which from the very first day granted him a privileged position within the gunman's hierarchy. He became one of Escobar's personal bodyguards and the operational chief of his armed wing, self-named Los Extraditables. In life, he confessed to being directly responsible for some 300 killings carried out with his own hands, and the mastermind or coordinator of approximately 3,000 more, according to his own detailed counts made on camera, a figure he repeated with a macabre pride that scandalized Colombia for entire decades as a media phenomenon. He took part in the killing of presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galán in August 1989, the assassination that changed Colombian politics for an entire generation. He logistically coordinated the attack on Avianca Flight 203 3 months later. He was behind the bomb against the DAS building in December of the same year, which left 63 fatal victims and more than 600 wounded in the heart of downtown Bogotá. He personally eliminated the commander of the Medellin police, Colonel Valdemar Franklin Quintero, at point-blank range. And in an episode he himself recounted for years on camera without a single visible gesture of remorse, he received the direct order from Escobar to take out his own girlfriend, Wendy Chavarriaga, who was pregnant at the time, and he carried it out personally. 4 names that weigh more than many entire wars. Popeye turned himself into the justice system in 1992 and spent 23 years in prison for terrorism, trafficking of substances, conspiracy to commit crimes, and aggravated homicide. He walked free in 2014, availing himself of judicial benefits for good conduct accumulated at La Picota. Instead of disappearing as El Mugre did, he did the exact opposite and became a unique case in the history of the cartel and of the narco phenomenon itself. He took advantage of the media boom around the Escobar phenomenon and the international series about the boss, founded a YouTube channel called Popeye Arrepentido that came to surpass 1.5 million active subscribers, wrote autobiographical books like Surviving Pablo Escobar, gave interviews on international networks in Argentina, Mexico, and the United States, and paraded through documentaries explaining with clinical coldness how the cartel's professional killings were carried out. A literal line of his spoken on screen during an interview with the Argentine journalist Ricardo Canaletti of the Treche channel in Buenos Aires. "You have to put 2 shots in the head from the eyebrows up. Whoever works from the eyebrows down is not a professional gunman." The line ran across every newscast of the American continent within hours. He was filmed praying with flowers over Escobar's grave at the Jardins Monte Sacro cemetery in Medellin every December. He openly intended to run for the Senate of the Republic of Colombia. He maintained documented ties with figures of organized crime still active in Antioquia. His media persona was a walking contradiction that Colombian public opinion never quite knew how to digest. In 2018, they detained him again, this time for extortion and conspiracy to commit crimes after a formal complaint from several families in Antioquia, who claimed to have received payments under direct threat from him. He returned to prison, first to the Valledupar Penitentiary and later to La Picota in Bogotá. There, in late 2019, the doctors of the National Penitentiary and Prison Institute diagnosed him with terminal esophageal cancer, with confirmed metastasis in the lungs and liver, officially classified as untreatable by the medical authorities. He spent his final months hospitalized at the National Cancer Institute in Bogotá, receiving palliative care. He died in the early hours of February 6, 2020, at 57 years of age. His funeral generated an enormous national controversy when General Eduardo Zapatero, then commander of the Colombian army, sent public condolences to the family of the man who had boasted in life of 3,000 fatal victims. The most famous hitman of the cartel did not fall under gunfire in an operation or in a street ambush. He fell in a hospital bed with an IV in his arm and a crucifix on the nightstand. Sometimes illness finishes what the state could not finish. And now we reach the last one on this list, the one we left for the end for a very specific reason that will become clear in the next few minutes of the story. Alvaro de Jesús Agudelo, alias El Limón. He was born on December 18, 1956 in Envigado, Antioquia, the same district that gave birth to Escobar, and that over the years would become the cartel's operational headquarters. He never reached Popeye's media fame, nor El Chopo's military rank, nor El Arete's terrorist signature. He began as a driver and trusted right-hand man of Roberto Escobar, alias El Osito, the boss's older brother. When Roberto turned himself into the justice system alongside Popeye and Otoniel González Franco, alias Otto. In October 1992, El Limón switched bosses without blinking and went on to serve Pablo directly. What came next turned him, without intending it at all, into an eternal name within Colombian criminal history. His role during the years of La Catedral, the prison mansion where Escobar formally served his sentence between June 1991 and July 1992, was specific and extremely delicate. He was the main person in charge of channeling the bribes to the military and police who formally guarded the outer perimeter, offering them hard cash, food for their homes, school supplies for their small children, wrapped Christmas gifts, whatever it took to keep them bought for months. Without El Limón, La Catedral would never have functioned the way it functioned during those 14 bizarre months in which Escobar kept running the cartel from a prison he had designed himself. The silent operation of a bodyguard who never appeared in the photos. When Escobar escaped from La Catedral on July 22, 1992, amid the confirmed rumor that the government would transfer him to a standard military prison, El Limón was one of the few men who stayed by his side during the 16 months of the final flight. The rest fell one by one during that terminal period. El Mexicano, Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, had already fallen 3 years earlier in December 1989. Pinina, already buried in Medellin. Tyson, already buried in San Pedro. El Chopo, already buried after the 48 official bullet impacts. Gustavo Gaviria, the boss's cousin and direct partner, brought down by the elite corps in August 1990. El Angelito, his security chief, eliminated in October 1993, leaving him practically defenseless in the middle of an operation. The entire structure of the cartel had evaporated around him in barely 3 years. By late November 1993, Escobar was practically alone in Medellin. He had El Limón left. Only El Limón at his side, day and night, sleeping in adjacent rooms and moving together in taxis to avoid being located by the directional antennas of the search block and the radio amateurs of Los Pepes. His own mother, Doña Hermilda Gaviria de Escobar, came to visit him on December 1, 1993, with a wrapped birthday cake for her son who was turning 44. She left him complaining of a persistent acidity that had been following him for weeks, and she departed before dawn the next day knowing nothing. It was the last time the woman saw her son alive and on his feet. On the afternoon of December 2nd, in a middle-class house in the Los Olivos neighborhood of Medellin, Escobar had just eaten a plate of spaghetti prepared in the kitchen. He had taken off his shoes to rest and was wearing only blue cotton socks. He was on the phone with his son Juan Pablo, trying to arrange his family's departure from the country as a negotiated condition for a possible surrender, when he began to hear strange movements on the street out front. He told Juan Pablo on the line, exact words recorded in transcript. "Hold on, I hear some strange movements out there." El Limon leaned out the second-floor window, saw the men of the search block approaching from the front of the house with vests and rifles, and made his choice in a matter of seconds. He went out into the street firing a 9mm pistol to try to distract the uniformed commando and give the boss time to flee out the back over the rooftops of the neighboring houses of the alley. The maneuver lasted mere counted seconds. El Limon was brought down in the front garden of the house, cut down by the concentrated bursts of the search block, while Escobar leaped from a second-floor window onto the clay roof of the adjacent house with the pistol in one hand and a Motorola radio in the other. There, 2 men of the block were waiting for him, holding position. There, the myth of the boss ended. 3 shots, one in the right ear that sealed everything. Up to here, the official version known for 30 years by all of Colombia. El Limon died as the boss's last loyal bodyguard, giving everything in a suicidal distraction, sacrificing himself voluntarily for the chief who had pulled him out of driving cars to make him a trusted right-hand man. The popular song that circulated for years in Medellin, Me Matan Limon, portrayed him as that faithful ally amid so many visible traitors. He was buried in the same Jardines Montesacro cemetery in Medellin where Escobar rests, just a few exact meters from the boss's grave. The legend was closed up with ribbon and a golden bow. But in December 2023, a direct survivor of the cartel broke the silence in an interview published by Infobay Colombia that shook the historians of Latin American trafficking of substances. He stated word for word that Pablo was handed over by El Limon, that it was one of his own who gave the exact final location to the authorities, and that the heroic performance in the front garden was not heroism at all, but a practical way of leaving no living witnesses to the previously negotiated pact. The hypothesis had been circulating for decades in intimate circles close to the boss, especially among members of the Escobar Gaviria family itself, but it had never reached the public space with such raw, signed journalistic bluntness. If the version is true, Escobar's last loyal gunman was, in reality, the one who silently sold the definitive coordinate of the Los Olivos neighborhood to the search block. Today he rests beside his boss in the same earth, in the same Montesacro cemetery beneath headstones that the tourists who make their pilgrimage to Medellin photograph every week without entirely knowing what they're really photographing. A final image that closes the whole cycle of the Medellin cartel in a single cemetery frame. Victim and executioner, chief and employee betrayed and betrayer, sleeping meters apart beneath the same Antiochian marble stone. The eternal doubt set on top of the 2 bodies. The cartel's last loyal bodyguard may also have been the cartel's last traitor. 7 gunmen who kept the boss's empire standing for 15 straight years, 7 different ways of leaving the same criminal war. Like and subscribe.